The Senate Judiciary Committee will come to order. We have a member of committee who's testifying in another committee and will be joining us later at the conclusion of that testimony in that other committee. And our first order of business is the continuation of the confirmation hearing on Rachel L. Pickering, who is an appointee to be judge on the Kansas Court of Appeals. We had thorough questions yesterday as part of our confirmation process. Judge Pickering, and I'm referring to her as Judge Pickering because she currently serves as a district court judge in Shawnee County, Kansas. And after the hearing, I believe that Judge Pickering had other additional conversations with senators and answered additional questions, including coming to my office as well. And I commend her for doing that and for the conversations she has had. I want to speak for a moment regarding the correspondence that was exchanged starting last week and over the weekend heading into this week regarding the confirmation. As we mentioned yesterday, leadership of this committee sent a letter to the nominee, Judge Pickering, as well as to the governor's office and to committee members, raising an issue of concern for leadership of the committee, which was a case in front of the Court of Appeals where Judge Pickering was appellate counsel for a criminal defendant. The letters were exchanged because the issue of ineffective assistance of counsel was found because the Senate did some of its own looking around and investigating, and the issue became a concern. And that's why the letter was sent to the judge to let her know ahead of the hearing that this was an issue of concern, to give her a fair opportunity to be prepared to address the issue before this committee. We also notified the governor's office and want to share with those following along in the committee meeting room and those online as well, that in the correspondence, in the reply from the governor's office, the governor's office said that our office was aware of the ineffective assistance of counsel issue that you raised in your letter. Judge Pickering has been honest and forthcoming with our office about this, and we thoroughly vetted the matter. And again, I commend Judge Pickering on her honesty and her ability to be forthcoming about this. However, it raises the governor's letter, the letter from the governor's office raises a bigger concern, that this is a checks and balance process, the confirmation hearing process. And when the governor's office has an issue that was of interest enough to the office to have conversations with the appointee and to not share that information with the Senate, that when the Senate on its own became aware of this, it was concerning. And it's disappointing that in this process, the governor's office did not share with the Senate this very important issue. Had the committee leadership here decided to act in a different way and not inform the appointee ahead of time, the discussion yesterday, the questions could have gone a very different way. And it's the Senate's intent to be transparent and forthcoming. And I believe in this regard that we were. Again, cannot express enough how disappointing it is that we have information now that the governor's office was aware of this. It was a one instance apparently in the judge's background. It was an issue of concern enough to the governor's office, but that it wasn't shared with the Senate. And when the Senate found out about it, it was of concern to the Senate, enough of a concern that the committee here reached out to the nominee and asked her to address it. We've talked about the confirmation hearing process for our Court of Appeals is a checks and balance. Thankfully, the checks and balance, I believe, worked in this case because of the due diligence and the effort on behalf of the committee here. So I don't want it to be overlooked that this could have gone very differently if in the process the Senate committee leadership here did not make the disclosure to the nominee and to the governor's office and brought this to the attention of the nominee and an opportunity to be heard and to fairly address it. And again, can't overstate the disappointment in the withholding of the information from the governor's office to the Senate committee. So with that, again, I want to thank the judge for her efforts in talking with senators, fully answering my questions. And with that, then I would open it up to the committee for either a motion or any further discussion. And if we're going to have a motion, just to remind the committee that we did take a break yesterday after the comments and questions with the judge and had an opportunity to separately talk with the judge if that was something that the judge and the committee member wanted to do, and to, in your own mind, form your deliberations about what you wanted to do today and to have those deliberations here in public right now. So we are back in order, and the possible motions that the chair will entertain today are as follows. Either I move the committee recommend the appointment favorably for confirmation by the Senate, or I move the committee recommend the appointment be not confirmed by the Senate, or I move the committee report the appointment to the Senate without recommendation. And if you're making the motion and you can't get those exact words right, we have the assistance of the reviser, and I'll help you out too. It's a very important process, and we want to make sure that we move it through accurately and correctly. So with that, then I will entertain a motion or discussion. Yes, Senator Wilborn.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Having not going over what you just so eloquently spoke to, the issue is not the candidate, but the process. There was a failure that could have been disastrous. I think this is an example of the confirmation process working. And I'm disappointed the governor's office failed to provide information in a timely manner. And I want to see this process improve going forward. I'm glad we came around to such a favorable view of the judge, Judge Pickering. I'm proud to move her out of this committee. We recommend Judge Pickering favorable to the Senate for full consideration.
Just a moment. Thank you, Senator.
And I'm open to edit.
Is that for the reviser? Is that an appropriate motion? Thank you. And then for a second, Senator Olson with the second. Thank you. Committee, then further discussion on the motion. Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support this motion without reservation. As senators, we've been called upon, some of us many, many times, to approve appointments. And the process is flawed. Oftentimes, we conduct our interview with the nominee before we've ever received their application packet. Show me what circumstance someone would interview someone for a position with a blank piece of paper with no background information. When a vetting process occurs, that information should be included as well for us. I was involved in a process 2 years ago whereby an email that was sent to me, an email of support sent to me by a private citizen, somehow the governor's office took that email and distributed it to all committee members. How they got a private email that was sent to me is still under question, but there is a very flawed process. But what we did see yesterday was open to the public, a conversation where each of us as senators had the opportunity to ask questions, to get clarification. I personally feel, again, without reservation, that this is an ideal candidate. I could not ask for more. We have an individual that acknowledged a hiccup early in their career and what she did moving forward to help others, students, and practitioners. But I think, based on part of what I have committed to, is what's happening with each year it's about 10,000 kids, and that's kids that go through the foster care system. And when we, as the Judiciary Committee, have worked with delays in our judicial process, what we did here yesterday was an individual that made certain her span of control, there were not going to be delays for those children and for their families. So this dedication to serving Kansans, I think, should be paramount. And I respect that she looks at what is in law and will make her reasoning and her decisions based on what is in law. She's a textualist, not weaving one way or another. What does she want it to be? But what does the law say? And I think as legislators, when we work to pass law, we want someone in that black robe in the court system that is going to honor the laws that are passed by this body. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Other discussion? Yes, Senator Corson.
No, thank you, Madam Chair. I sort of want to follow up on what Senator Baumgartner said. I think we've had the privilege of having some really strong nominees come before us on this committee for the Court of Appeals. But I do think that Judge Pickering is, in terms of background, breadth, depth of experience, is really in a class of herself. And I don't want to repeat her whole resume. I know the committee knows that resume, but to have somebody for a court that has such a heavy criminal docket, with the experience of being a trial counsel in criminal felony trials for both defendants and for the state, somebody who's served as appellate counsel for both defendants and the state, somebody who's argued criminal cases before the Court of Appeals and the Kansas Supreme Court before as a defense attorney and as an attorney for the state, somebody who's as a trial judge has presided over a criminal felony docket, somebody who actually a year ago sat with the Court of Appeals. I just find it hard to imagine that there are really any Kansans or any members of the bar who have such depth and breadth of experience to sit on the Court of Appeals. So I'm a strong supporter of this nomination, and I'm glad to see that it looks like we're moving her out, hopefully favorably for passage.
Thank you. And I want to follow up on Senator Baumgartner and Senator Wilborn's comments and Senator Corson's in some regard about the resume of the judge, and also touch again on what Senator Baumgartner had mentioned about when we are presented sometimes, we are having interviews with the nominees that have come through this committee without the confirmation packet from the governor's office. It's not a very effective way to be proceeding without that additional information from the governor's office. In the history of the state of Kansas, since the Senate confirmation process has been in place for the last 10 years. I believe there have been 10 confirmation hearings. This Senate Judiciary Committee has conducted, this will now be our 6th one. And like Senator Baumgartner had mentioned, and Senator Wilburn touched on as well, the process, I would say the communication from the governor's office is flawed. And we are thankful that the legislature in its wisdom put into place the Senate confirmation process 10 years ago so that the Senate could do its work and have the full vetting of nominees for our highest levels of our judiciary branch of government. With that, are there other comments or discussion? Senator Peck, who I want to thank again for joining our committee and sitting in on the continuation of the confirmation hearing. Thank you for being here, Senator Peck. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's been a real pleasure to have the opportunity to serve 2 days on Judiciary Committee in my previous 16 sessions. Sorry, 14. Can't keep track of the number. I had never been around the Judiciary Committee. I had heard a lot of stories, horror stories about the Judiciary Committee, but I have not found that to be true of the last two. Prior to my 2-day appointment to this committee, neither myself nor Judge Pickering knew that I was going to be on the committee. She did come to my office. I believe she probably made it to most Senate offices to visit with me, to introduce herself, willing to answer questions that I may have, basically just make herself available for me to get a little bit of a feel for what type of a person Judge Pickering is. So I have been impressed. I was impressed by that because not all nominees or individuals that we confirm do I even know who in the world the person is prior to the vote on the Senate floor. Following yesterday's hearing, because of some questions and comments that I had, Judge Pickering circled back around to my office, and in credit to her, Madam Chairman, my understanding from my office assistant is she was on numerous different occasions seeking me out. And finally, I happened to be in the office when she came in, so we visited, and she provided clarification on some of my questions, which I really appreciated her effort. And then I also appreciated the answers that she provided because the word yesterday was used, I believe, muddle things. And we came to an understanding that my definition of muddle and hers were a little different, but we were actually on the same page. So I have been impressed with this process and with Judge Pickering and her forthcoming information for me, for the committee. However, I'm with several on this committee because of the fact that, as you pointed out at the beginning of the committee hearing, that we have a letter from the governor's office that says, as you read, our office was aware of the ineffective assistance of counsel issue that you raised in your letter, which you had sent to the governor. That raises questions in my mind about the governor's office having withheld or potentially will withhold information on other nominees or appointees who do not stand for Senate confirmation. I believe that it's vital that we have all the information about individuals that we are going to be voting to confirm or non-confirm. So I think this process has revealed some things, certainly to me, to the legislature, and I guess I must ask if the Senate is intentionally not informed of information. And Madam Chairman, no matter how significant or insignificant it may or may not be in the minds of any particular person, whether it's the governor's office or any particular legislature, the question to me is, how can we as a Senate adequately or properly do our job for the citizens of Kansas in vetting candidates or nominees for judicial positions or other positions as it relates to Senate confirmation. And as we know, not every position that the governor has the statutory authority to appoint stands for scrutiny from the Senate as it relates to an up or down vote. Some positions are strictly appointed, and we go on down the road. And we don't know if there may be something in the background of some of these individuals because we did not have the opportunity to visit with them and ask questions. So again, as it relates to Judge Pickering, not a problem on my part at all, but this process, we certainly need more openness, more transparency, full disclosure and information of everything about someone that has been appointed or nominated, rather, appointed too, from my perspective, but nominated by the governor's office. So I will certainly be supporting Judge Pickering, but again, have concerns, frustrations, disappointments with some things that have happened during this process. And I will reiterate, of no fault at all to Judge Pickering. I thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. To follow up on Senator Peck's comments, particularly in this particular instance when the governor's office was aware of the issue that was particularly relevant to qualifications for a position on the Court of Appeals, meaning it was a case that was directly in front of the Court of Appeals and had directly to do with legal practice of the nominee, that if this type of very relevant information that should be fully vetted wasn't passed along and disclosed to the Senate, what is being withheld that the Senate doesn't become aware of through this process. So it's very concerning and would encourage more transparency and disclosure, both favorable and unfavorable, to all who come before the Senate for confirmation, whether it's appointment by the governor or some other appointing body, that we need to have full transparency as we work on behalf of the Kansans who live and work in our state. With that, Senator Bowers, thank you for your testimony in the other committee, and thank you for joining us here today with the conclusion of your testimony in the other committee. So thank you. Do we have other comments or discussion about the motion? Seeing none, then you all have heard the motion. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The motion passes. With that, then, we do have Judge Pickering in the committee meeting room today. Thank you again for joining us, and congratulations on having the favorable recommendation of the Senate Judiciary Committee that will now be passed on to the Senate as a whole. And it's been a long process so far, and you can tell that the Senate Judiciary Committee is in favor of your confirmation. That is now up to the Senate as a whole body. So thank you again for all your attention to this matter and for the conversations you have had. The questions that I raised with you in our meetings, I also presented yesterday in the hearing, and so it's important that the public sees that as well. So again, congratulations, and you now move on to the Senate as a whole and for their consideration. So with that, then, committee, we will close the confirmation hearing on Rachel L. Pickering for Judge of the Kansas Court of Appeals and make a request for bill introduction. Do we have any requests for bill introductions? Yes. Please state your name and who you're here on behalf of.
Good morning, Madam Chairperson and members of the committee. I'm Jeff Weigeman with Steve Kearney and Associates, representing the Kansas County and District Attorneys Association. We would like to introduce two bills in your fine committee. 23 RS 0447, a bill concerning violations of a protective order as an element of burglary, and 23 RS 0448, a bill concerning adding the language conduit rule as an exception for hearsay.
Thank you. The bills will be so introduced.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Committee.
Thank you. Do we have any other requests for bill introductions? Seeing none, then that will stand at ease for just a moment. Thank you, committee, for standing at ease. And with that, thank you for your work on the confirmation hearing, and we are adjourned.